Hello there and welcome back to the panel discussion. Any questions should be to all of the panel, and if you want to ask a question, please just raise your hand. We already have some questions that have been handed to us, so we're going to get cracking with those. Okay, so we've had some questions actually sent in advance, believe it or not, via that social media thing that I don't really understand, to be honest with you. But via the Twitter, we have a question for the panel. Levels of knife crime in London and Croydon in particular are unacceptably high. How would your party tackle the menace? So first up, I'm going to look to Mr. Finch.
Thank you. There's a lot of talk about, usually the thing is, oh, there isn't enough youth sensors, or this sort of nonsense in my opinion. I think it's a much complex, bigger issue than simply that. I honestly think that the welfare system itself has caused a massive sort of lack of moral values in society, where men now simply are sort of now acting liberally than usually, and not listening to moral values of like family units and whatnot, you know, the typical nuclear family unit. And women are more tempted to go on the welfare state rather than having a traditional family, because it's quite generous in what it offers. This, I think, is causing a major effect in the knife crime. Like, there's a famous American economist in America. He says that he is, I have to say this, but he is a black guy. He says that the welfare system done more than what slavery could never do. It destroyed the family unit. And I honestly think that's Thomas Sowell, by the way, an economist in America. And this, I think, is the reason why that behaviour is just, it's more complex than simply, oh yeah, because you look at all the knife crime, the people who are doing the stabbings and the people who are being stabbed, is that a lot of them come from fatherless homes. And that needs to be more concentrated, and the family values and morals need to be brought back to our society and simply just be back to the traditional sort of way.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to take that one up?
I'll say something. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, there are short-term issues and long-term issues here, of course, and in the short term there is a link between police resourcing and levels of crime. We as a party are committed to having 20,000 extra police officers on the beat, and we've costed that and we can afford it, and that will help. And other things will help: tougher sentencing for knife crime, and zero tolerance towards carrying knives. But it's obviously not going to solve the problem, and the solutions are much longer term, and they are, as the last person touched upon, they are linked in family breakdown and getting into communities, getting into gang culture, and slowly trying to sort that out. So short term, more police resourcing; long term, looking at the underlying problems and trying to solve them.
Thank you. Now I've seen a couple of hands go up. Are there points you want to make on this particular question? Okay, yeah.
Just on your concern about, was your point you would get rid of benefits?
Can you just talk up slightly, sir?
Was the point around reducing benefits or getting rid of benefits to reducing life crime? It didn't make much sense to me.
Do you want to talk that? What I'm saying is that the welfare system has become a little bit too generous nowadays, and like I've literally known women to say that if they don't own property by their 30s, they will purposely become impregnated and reject a traditional family value in order to get free housing and a welfare state. I mean, I've literally, people have said that to me.
I would imagine that's quite a small subset of human beings.
It might be, but the fact that actually exists, though, and that it's just, I come from a single parent background. Like my mother, she did do that. You know what I mean? Like that's how she lives in the place that she lives now. You know, it's like, you just have to live up to some truths that the welfare system, even though it's like good intentions when it was first created, it's created a lot of negative backlash that was never ever foreseen. and it's creating this sort of society where we're now degenerating.
But so the specific policy would be to reduce benefits?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and put it for the Libertarian Party. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that question. Chris, would you like to take on knife round?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, I would just make the point that Richard did touch on. Can you hear me? I messed up last time. Close up. Really close up.
Kiss it.
Okay. Alright. Got to get used to this practice. Got to get used to this. It feels really close, but okay. Brilliant. Right, okay, so what I wanted to make that Richard did touch upon was sentencing guidelines. I just want to refer to a tweet that went out this was in Birmingham, by the Birmingham Transport Police. What was the date? March, so a few months ago. I remember reading up on this story. It was a man was caught at Birmingham New Street Station, and I've got a picture of it. I don't know if you can see that from here, but the guy was caught carrying 3 knives. One of them was a combat knife that soldiers carry. I mean, it's lethal stuff. Perhaps one's just a kitchen knife, two combat knives, one kitchen knife. He was apprehended at the station, and his sentence was 4 months in prison, suspended for 12 months, and with electronic tag around his ankle. Now, I would be bold enough to say that it's not a sentence that is necessarily fits the crime of choosing to go out one evening to a train station in a very crowded public area, carrying 3 knives like that. Absolutely extraordinary. So I'll give make a very simple point that sentencing needs to be much, much tougher to act as a deterrent, to make somebody think twice about choosing to do something so stupid. And I'll also make a second point as well about what our police are doing and what they ought to be doing. At the moment, for a number of years now, we have had a police service in this country. That is essentially a fire brigade response police force, vehicular patrols, so-called. So, oddly enough, there is nothing that the police can do. They can't un-burgle you when your house has been burgled. You can't un-mug you once you've been mugged in the street. They certainly can't unstab you if you've been stabbed in the street. There's absolutely very little that a police officer can do once he's been called and he's arrived at the scene of something like this. What we need to do in this country is to instruct the police to get back to preventative foot patrolling, like we used to have. It's Richard mentioned also about funding the police and more numbers. I agree. Sentencing, I agree. But if we have local police patrolling the streets on foot, then goodness me, somebody will think twice about going out in the streets as well, carrying a knife. I'll just to add one more point on this, if I may, which is that there is a brilliant case study that was done on this subject, of preventative policing, preventative foot patrol. You just bear with me. It was in Peterborough. Oxford University did an interesting case study. It's an investigation and experiment with the police over about a year, I think it was, where 2 police community support officers, so not even constables with full policing powers, just community support. So the visibility, the uniform, and some powers, but not the full powers. And they put them in very targeted areas. They're very targeted with a particular crime hotspots, and they installed them there to carry out preventative foot patrols. And 12 months of data was carried, and they saw categorically a dramatic reduction of crime in that area. I appreciate we're not talking about knife crime, but crime generally. Fascinating case study. Get back to preventative foot patrols, and that in itself will make a huge difference.
Thank you. Neville, do you want in on this?
I think it's we have to be very careful when we are speaking about. I don't use the term knife crime anyway. I don't use it, but I think for many folks here, I think we need to understand what's happening. Until we have parents that are prepared to take responsibility in the home, we're going to be having these problems over and over again. The government cannot raise our children. Schools cannot raise their children. Parents have to raise their children. I've worked with, over the last 30 years, I've worked in Rochester Prison, been to I've worked with young men who are serving from anything between 5 and 18 years in prison. I've mentored over probably 50 or 60 young men in my 30 years, and I'm not purposely going to try to give you all the answers in a few minutes, because that wouldn't do justice to the seriousness of the problem. The question is a good one. I think we all need to understand that until communities are prepared to come together and really face up to what we're seeing today. When I say communities, I say we need a joint-up approach. I mean, not just schools, community centres, churches, the police service. We need a partnership approach to this. 99% of the young men I work with in the schools, and I currently work in a school at the moment in Chelsea at the moment, the primary school actually. 99% of the young men tell me, and you've heard it already, they carried a knife because they were frightened, they were scared. Don't believe the bravado, don't believe the act that they show you on the street. They are frightened young boys, trying to make sense of their communities, make sense of what's happening. Many, and I go 99% of them that carry a knife. They do not want to use that knife. Honestly, they don't go out there to always use a knife. Yes, there have been some revenge attacks, and we know there are. And if you look at the stats have shown us that if you look at where a knife attack has happened, follow the stats behind it, later on there is another attack where there's a revenge attack. But most of the time, fear. We also too quick to criminalise some of these our young boys. Too quickly, we criminalise them. If you see a few of them walking on the street, and let's be honest in here, if you see 4 or 5 black boys walking on the street, 99% of you in here would feel a sense of fear. Thank you. So, but they're not going to wear suits, and I want to tell you now. Thanks for that. But let me tell you one of the problems. For many interviews, and when I got them interviews, they don't have shoes. They have trainers. Now their trainers will cost more than my shoes. Yes. Now I accept that, but they don't have a suit. That is the street clothes they wear. They wear a street face to survive. They live in a state where they have to survive. So to survive, they have to put on an act. They wear a mask to survive. Depression. Did you know most of the young men, well, 50% of young men I speak to suffer with depression. But would you understand how that depression plays out? It plays out in a way that probably you've never realised, this depression. Anger. But you see, the interventions we use where you see some of these boys with depression, we don't give them CBT, no. What we want to do, the top of the interventions we're using, is we want to put them in psychiatric wards. Or we then give them a criminal record that then prevents them for the rest of their life getting a job.
Okay, Neville. Sorry, can I just round that up? So your party, the Democrats and Veterans, will do?
So Democrats and Veterans, community mentoring, veterans. We work with lots of veterans. We believe the veterans that fought for this country, and many of them have been on the front line. What better people to go out and provide mentoring in the community than our veterans? We believe also we need, as I said, we need to work more closely with our police service. We need to work closely with churches. What do I say churches? And I want to give light on this. Grandparents. We need to get the grandparents back involved. Grandparents can have a great role in raising the children of today. So we just need to have this joint-up approach where we can start to see that the problem what we're having will not stop at just putting more police on the street. Yes, we need to open up our police stations. We cannot continue with police station closures. Yes, we do need to have stiffer sentencing as well. But let's look at the root causes. Education in schools, of course, that's what we want. But Community mentoring is a big area for us. Walk alongside these young people in the communities. Walk alongside them. Give them great role models. That's what we think is nice.
Thank you very much, Neville. And finally, Hallway.
Thanks for giving me a chance. It's quite unfair, everyone's said lots of really good points, much I agree with again. Okay, yeah, this is quite difficult to get it right. Thankfully for me, I was asked this question already a couple of years ago when I was at the hustings, when I was a candidate for a general election. At that time, my answer to them was, well, I'll just tell you now. Knife crime is a problem. It was a problem 2 years ago. It's much worse now. We all know this. But to tackle this, others have already mentioned it, but I'll highlight it, outline it clearly again. We need to tackle both the symptom and the cause. The symptom is people carrying around weapons in case of violence because they fear violence. Yes, Neville makes a good point. And so the solution is basically the most efficient, straightforward way is more bobbies on the beat, stop and search. If it is unpopular, but it works, and even better if it can be intelligence-led. But we need to just confront the reality that this is not always available. This is difficult to tackle. This is not something that can be solved immediately, but we need to look at the root cause. The root cause is there is no family values. Okay, at the hustings I mentioned to you 2 years ago, I looked out over the audience. There was about 60, 80 people, family people. I looked at them and I could tell immediately that none of their children will be involved in knife crime. Why? Because good parenting prevents knife crime. And this is what we need to encourage. More community spirit, people caring for each other, even if families break down. I come from a single parent family myself. But if parents show an interest, if your family shows an interest, and we can encourage this as a community, even at the government level, we don't need to pour money into it. Just educate, encourage family cohesion. Stop relying on the government. A very famous man once said, "Ask not what the government can do for you, or ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country."
Thank you very much. Okay, so for our second question, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to blend a question that we had already sent in to us beforehand and a question that we've had from the floor via the forms. So there was recently the Newport West by-election, I believe, and UKIP did okay in it. But when you consider how much the shenanigans and the fiasco we have in Parliament, other pro-Brexit parties did not do very well at all. Essentially, how are you guys going to, moving forward in a post-Brexit world, how are you going to encourage more and more people to vote for you? I'm going to hand this to Richard, please.
Okay, well, I probably am the appropriate person to try and answer this first because I was in Newport West campaigning. I was born in Newport West and I spoke to hundreds of people on the doorstep in Newport West. And one thing came across loud and clear is that Brexit voters were totally disillusioned. And countless times people said to me, "I'm never voting again." And there is no doubt, if you look at the turnout in Newport West, at 37%, most Brexit voters stayed at home. And we have to re-engage people in politics. And the way to re-engage people, I touched on this in my speech, is to rebuild trust in politics. I do not think in the end people will vote for Brexit parties just because they're Brexit parties. I think they'll vote for parties who are offering to solve a whole range of problems. Living standards that have stagnated, wealth inequality which has grown massively, and public services which are under massive strain following nearly 10 years of austerity. And the idea that the solution to people's problems is more austerity is cantly, I find that incredible. And the idea that we need a smaller state than we've got at the moment. And the reason Labour won in Newport West is because the people who voted in Newport West cared more about austerity than they did about Brexit. And that's not to say the people in Newport West as a whole cared more about it, but the people who voted cared more about it. Unless we enthuse people about more than just Brexit and the fact we can solve the everyday problems in their lives, they'll stay at home.
Thank you. Well, that was excellent local insight that I didn't know we were going to get. So, brilliant. Chris, I'm going to pass this question across to you. And sort of almost leading on from that, some of the parties that are represented here tonight did stand in the Newport West by-election. UKIP did okay, it held its deposit. Others didn't do so well. Obviously, the Foundation Party is a very new party. Didn't stand in the Newport West by-election. So obviously nobody can vote for you unless you put up candidates. So almost moving on from that is how are you going to, as a party, allow people to vote for you and get them to vote for you by putting up candidates? What's your sort of plan for that sort of thing?
Well, it's actually a very tough question to answer, really. I mean, it's essentially, what are you going to do to make sure your party is successful? What are you going to do to make sure you can inspire people to vote for you and seek to be able to provide an answer to some big questions? I just simply point to my early remarks this evening about kind of priorities that we have, and in the time ahead we will certainly be looking very hard indeed to launch a few national campaigns, one in particular which I'm very excited about. But I'm not really sure if I understand the question. I mean, if we're talking about I think the original question was, why did certain pro-Brexit parties not do particularly well in a particular by-election? Well, I mean, if the question is why didn't the Leave voters get out and back Leave parties, well, why should they have to be asked to? Why should they have to vote twice for the same thing? The government said that their vote would be a once-in-a-generation decision. We had a referendum, a fair election throughout the country, and they gave their answer, and we've seen what's happened since. And as you know, why? Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised people are being fed up with politics and not bothering. But if their vote didn't count the first time, why would it count the second? I'm not at all surprised by that kind of local election result from the point of view of a Brexit party, and it would be their responsibility in that respective area to touch on the local issues and to instill a little bit of inspiration. My position is clear. The two main political parties are no longer fit for purpose. They are absolutely devoid of any inspiration or insight whatsoever. They did it once, years ago, but not anymore. And I think that the future elections are ours to be won. Generally speaking, I would like to say that something I didn't say earlier, but I'll just quickly say now if the chair will permit me.
You've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, what I would say is that more power and control for the ordinary citizen is the way in which elections are going to be won. I think the time has passed when political parties won elections based on the best well-presented public relations campaign, recycling the same ideas, basically the same bureaucratic, expensive, big central government. I think the future elections will be won based on which political parties can offer and deliver the greatest degree of control and empower for the ordinary citizen to help and empower themselves and their families rather than depending on the government. So that is the landscape going forward, and we'll see which party makes successful.
Thank you. Sean, I think the Libertarian Party also didn't stand in Newport West, is that right? Okay, so if you could answer the question and say, Ray, that was it.
There's a more simpler reason to why, well, first of all, I predicted UKIP would come third and it would be a 40% turnout. I was correct and it was 37%, so I was 3% off. It's a more simpler reason. It's not about really my opinion about austerity, it's simply because it's a by-election. Only hardcore political people who genuinely like politics will come out and vote. The everyday general man or woman on the street don't know there's a by-election going on. So what you're going to get is the hardcore people that are coming out. Wales as well is a renowned Labour area because they're in this tribal mindset of it's Labour first Conservative, and everything else after is simply a footnote in history, more like. Because they're under the sort of impression of this sort of, oh well, my dad or my grandfather voted for Labour, and therefore I'm going to vote for Labour. It's this sort of redundant thinking, or oh, Thatcher closed all the coal mines and all this. even though Labour factually started closing the mines first and closed double in Thatcher ever did. It's this sort of mindset is the reason why that Labour won. I said there's no point of standing a Libertarian candidate unless we want to do advertising, because when I stood in the Lewisham East by-election last year, I was under no delusion I was going to win that election. I didn't exactly hand my resignation in. It was simply for two things. One, to advertise the party, and two, because that's where I was born and raised, in Lewisham. And a little bit of an ego trip to go, hello, I'm the guy standing for an MP now. He used to be the guy going to all the pubs and whatever. It's more because of that reason. UKIP simply didn't win, a Brexiteer party simply didn't win because it's a by-election. It's as simple as that. It's always going to be a low turnout. In general elections, because it's on the news constantly around nationwide, people know there's a general election going on. But when it's a by-election, no one really cares, or at least the average. And who UKIP and the SDP and DNV and all the other parties that stood in that area, they're trying to convince the non-voter to get on their side, but the non-voter is not interested in by-elections. It's as simple and plain as that. Not austerity, not because of this, it's simply because they just weren't aware the election was going on.
Thank you. Okay, so Hongwei, UKIP did hold its deposit, got about 8% I believe, but notwithstanding the fiasco that we've seen in Parliament in the last couple of months, still wasn't able to make massive inroads. What could they do better, and how are they going to succeed going forward?
Well, yes, UKIP campaigned very hard. We poured a lot of resources into it, particularly manpower. We even drove people up by bus from London to Wales to help campaign, and we did relatively well. But as the others have said, this is tribal, and basically the outcome is determined. Now, some people have challenged all the Brexit parties and said, why haven't you done a deal? Oh, we could be strategic about this. Well, UKIP did a deal once, or informally did a deal once in 2017. We decided not to stand any candidate in constituencies where the incumbent MP was a Brexiter. Well, what a mistake that turned out to be. UKIP has been burned. We have learned from that mistake. We will not be doing any deals. UKIP are the original Brexit party. We do not trust the Tories. We'll keep on campaigning as we are. UKIP did win the referendum, or rather was very significant in playing a part in winning the referendum. So we'll keep campaigning to put our message out there. We'll keep pushing for PR, proportional representation. If people are not listened to, they will revolt. Let's hope our politicians are savvy enough to do something about it before it gets to that point.
Thank you. And finally, Neville, we've got a few more questions to get through, so if we could just do a bit succinct. Thank you.
Was that a hint to me?
Just a bit.
I'll take it. Okay, I'll answer very quickly. The direct democracy, we did stand up, I believe. We did stand in West. Now, for us, it's a simple one. Direct democracy is something that's going to take time to get into the psyche of people. But then why should it take time? Because what we're saying is power should be in the hands of the constituents. You should be able to call back your MP if he's not doing his job. Why wait 4 or 5 years as it is now? If you can get 10% of your constituents to agree to any points that you raise, or something you want to change in your area, why shouldn't that go down to local referendum? At a local level, I believe direct democracy can be and should be the answer. We need to change the way we do politics. Now, of course, that will take time, because we're stuck in this way of doing things in this country. Representative democracy has been the way we've done it, and we'll continue to do it that way. And I say again, it's broken. It's time for you to take back control. And the only way you're going to ever do that is to vote for a direct democracy movement. We're the only movement in this country now that's offering something totally different, something revolutionary. Let's not just keep doing the same old thing. because you're just going to get the same old results.